Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu. Amma ba'du fa'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. By the grace and mercy of Allah Ta'ala, we have been studying the life of Hazrat Imam Mahdi, Masih-e-Maud, Syedna Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Qadiani alayhi salatu wasalam. And we had covered all the way till the year 1872. And inshallah ta'ala, in today's lecture, we'll try to cover all the way up till 1875. It is not possible for me to cover every single incident that takes place between these time frames. So what I am doing is I'm selecting some of the main ones and presenting those, given the fact that time is also not on our side and time constrained due to the month of Ramadan. So without further ado, let's dive into the year 1872. 1872 is a year when Sayyidna Hazrat Masih-e-Maud alayhi salatu wasalam, by this time he was 37 years of age. And he was very well versed in religion, but it didn't stop him from further immersing himself into the ocean of religious knowledge. In 1872, August 25th, is the first record, or on the record, the first essay or an article that the promised Messiah ﷺ had published in a well-known newspaper of that time. Prior to this, under different pen names, I believe, Hazur's essays or articles would get published, but this time it was under his own name. This is August 25th, 1872. This was published in the city of Bangalore in India, and there was this newspaper by the name of Mansoor-e-Muhammadi, and every 10 days this newspaper would come out. So Promised Messiah ﷺ wrote an article, and this article was very unique. It was very unique because something like this had not happened before. Promised Messiah ﷺ wrote this article, and in this article he issued a challenge right off the bat. As they say that as soon as you enter the ring and you go for the right hook, you go for the swing. It appears that that's what Promised Messiah ﷺ did in this as well. As soon as he wrote this article, he challenged all the religious ideologies that existed in India at that time. And remember, India at that time was a melting pot of religious ideologies. You have Buddhists, Hindus of different types, Sanatan Dharam, Arya Samaj, you had Sikhs, you had Muslims of different identities, and then you have the Christians. So all these different faiths and people of no faith were represented in India at that time. So Promised Messiah ﷺ, steps into this ring and issues this challenge. And the challenge was, he said, I will give 500 rupees to whoever is able to produce one third of teachings from their authentic books pertaining to truthfulness. कि सच्चाई के बारे में जो मैं तालीमात इस्लाम की मुस्तनद किताबों से पेश करूंगा, उसके 1/3 के बराबर भी जो शख्स गैर मुस्लिमों में से अपने मजहब की मुस्तनद किताबों में से तालीम साबित कर देगा, 1/3 जितनों ने भी कर दिया, मैं 500 रुपये दूंगा. मसीह-ए-मौद अलैहिस्सलाम जानते थे कि कोई दूसरा मजहब अपनी मौजूदा सूरत और शक्ल में आ ही नहीं सकता इस्लाम के मुकाबिल पे, मुमकिन ही नहीं था. इसलिए क्योंकि ये मज़ाहिब जो थे, इनकी सूरतें बिगड़ चुकी हुई थी, तभी अल्लाह ताला ने दुनिया में इस्लाम को भेजा. All these world religions had become corrupted. That's the reason why Allah the Almighty sent Islam in this world to begin with. Afterwards, what we see is that nobody was able to take him up on this challenge, and there was radio silence from these religious priests to pundits to whoever these scholars were of different religions. Not a single thing came forward from their end. It was easy money. Bring 1/3 of whatever Syedna Ahmad was going to present related to teachings pertaining to truthfulness, and easy win, get 500 rupees. The reason I chose this incident is because later on these very people started saying, oh, Mirza Sahib ﷺ is not true in his claim. The man who would fight for the sake of upholding truth and true values was at one point accused by these people that there is no one bigger liar than him in this day and age. Na'uzubillah. Same was the case when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam claimed that he is the Prophet of Allah. Prior to that point, the very people, whether it be Umayyah bin Khalf, Abu Jahl, Abu Lahab, or whoever, the same people in that society of that time used to call Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam Sadiq wal Amin, the most truthful and the most trustworthy. And when the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gathered everyone, when he received the revelation from Allah Ta'ala that informed him that he is a prophet of God and he ought to warn the people of his own tribe, his family. وَأَنذِرْ أَشِيرَتَكَ الْأَقْرَبِينَ. What did Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam do? One of the narrations says that he got on top of a mountain and he addressed his people. एक पहाड़ी पे चढ़ के आपने अपनी कौम को मुखातिब करके फरमाया, and he said, if I was to tell you, अगर मैं तुम्हें ये कहूँ कि इस पहाड़ी के पीछे एक लश्कर है जो तुम पर हमला करने वाले, तो तुम क्या कहोगे? यक जुबान होके उन सब ने कहा. उस वक्त रिवायात में आता है अबू लहब भी खड़ा था. यक जुबान होके सब ने कहा कि हम आपकी बात मान लेंगे. क्यों मान लेंगे? इसलिए क्योंकि हमने आपको कभी भी झूठ बोलते नहीं देखा. इस पर मोहम्मद मुस्तफ़ा सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम ने फरमाया, अगर ये बात है तो फिर मैं तुमको ये गवाही देता हूं कि मैं अल्लाह का नबी हूं, और एक ऐसा लश्कर जिसको तुम आंखों से नहीं देख सकते वो तैयार बैठा है, यानी खुदा के मलाइका का लश्कर. बस ईमान ले आओ खुदा की जात पे. उस वक्त आपके अपने एक चचा ने, जो उस वक्त मौजूद था, अबू लहब, उसने कहा तब्बन लका या मोहम्मद अजमातना लिहाजा, कि तबाही हो तुझ पे है मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम, नाउजुबिल्लाह. इस बात के लिए आपने हमें यहाँ पे इकट्ठा किया था. और फिर उसके बाद जितना अरसा वो जिंदा रहा वो यही कहता रहा कि मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम झूठे हैं. सोचने की बात है, एक शख्स जिसने अपनी जिंदगी में कभी झूठ नहीं बोला, अब उसको कौम ये कहती है कि इससे बढ़कर कोई झूठा नहीं है, इससे बढ़कर कोई मुफ्तरी नहीं है. नाउजुबिल्लाह. हू बहू यही चीज मसीह-ए-मौद अलैहिस्सलाम के केस में हमें दिखाई देती है. वी सी द एग्जैक्ट सेम थिंग इन द केस ऑफ द प्रॉमिस्ड मसीह अलैहिस्सलाम. I gave the example that when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam claimed to be a prophet of Allah Ta'ala, he got on top of a mountain and he wanted to invite his family members and his tribe, his tribesmen towards Islam. So he gathered all of them and then he said, if I was to tell you that there is an army waiting to attack you, which is right behind this mountain, would you believe me? And they all said with one voice, yes, of course, because we have never found you to be a liar. He said, if that is the case, then know that I'm a prophet of God and there is an unseen army, meaning Khuda ke farishte, the angels of God. If you reject the message of Allah the Almighty, they will come and punish you. At that point, his own uncle Abu Lahab said that, woe unto you, O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, God forbid. Is this the reason why you have gathered us here today? And then for the rest of his life, Abu Lahab used to call Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam a liar. How is it possible that someone, until he claimed to be a Nabi, he was the most truthful, most trustworthy, most honorable, and the day he claims that he is a prophet of God, he becomes the most vilest of them all? It's inconceivable. And that is exactly what happens every single time whenever a prophet of Allah Ta'ala comes in this world. Before they claim to be prophet of God, they are the most trustworthy, most honorable, most truthful people among their kinsfolk, among their nation. But the moment they claim that they are from Allah the Almighty, they become the biggest liars in the eyes of the people. So look at this promised Messiah Islam is challenging people that I'm producing teachings related to truthfulness. And if you can bring even 1/3 of what I'm producing from reliable sources of Islamic literature, if you can do the same thing with your reliable and authentic literature, your religious literature, I'll give you 500 rupees. At that time, it was a very big thing. And remember, the father of the promised Messiah alayhi salam used to receive 700 annual pension. So 500 is a very big amount according to that year. Soon thereafter, promised Messiah alayhi salam then started receiving different newspapers in different languages in Qadian. And some of these newspapers were in different languages, which promised Messiah alayhi salam did not speak or understand. So he would have them translated, with the purpose that if there is anything in them against Islam, promised Messiah then would write in defense of it, and then somebody would translate them, and then they would get published in these newspapers. So now promised Messiah ﷺ started defending Islam at the very forefront, and he took the battle to these people, to these religious individuals of different communities, religious communities. Regarding the daily activities of Hazrat Masih-e-Maud alayhi salam, I would like to present at this point the testimony of an eyewitness. There was a young boy who used to come and visit the promised Messiah alayhi salam, and then he started living with Hazrat Masih-e-Maud alayhi salam for the most part. His name was Mirza Muhammad, and he belonged to an area called Langarwal. He says, and I quote, قریباً 1872 کا ذکر ہے، میں چھوٹا تھا. مرزا نظام الدین صاحب وغیرہ میرے پھوپھی زاد بھائی ہیں. اس وقت اہل حدیث کا بہت زور تھا. میرے والد صاحب بھی اہل حدیث تھے. شیخ رحیم بخش صاحب والد مولوی محمد حسین بٹالوی یہاں یعنی قادیان میں بہت آیا کرتے تھے. میں عام طور پر حضرت مرزا صاحب کے والد صاحب کے گھر بوجہ رشتہ داری آتا جاتا تھا. میں ان کے پاس عام طور پر رہتا تھا، مگر حضرت مرزا صاحب کی گوشہ نشینی کی وجہ سے میں یہی سمجھتا تھا کہ مرزا غلام مرتضیٰ صاحب کا ایک ہی لڑکا غلام قادر ہے. مگر مسجد میں مرزا صاحب کو بھی دیکھتا. میر ناصر نواب صاحب آیا کرتے تھے. ایک دن میں نے دیکھا کہ یہ اپنے مکان میں تشریف لے جا رہے ہیں. دوسرے دن میں نے دیکھا کہ آپ نماز پڑھ کر گھر میں تشریف لے جا رہے ہیں. میں آپ کے والد صاحب کے پاس بیٹھا ہوا تھا. میں بھی جلدی سے اٹھ کر آپ کی طرف گیا. آپ اپنے کمرے میں داخل ہو کر دروازہ بند کرنے لگے تھے کہ میں بھی جا پہنچا. آپ نے دروازہ کھول دیا اور دریافت کیا کہ کیا کام ہے. میں نے کہا میں ملنا چاہتا ہوں. آپ نے مجھے وہاں بٹھایا اور دریافت کیا کہ کہاں سے آئے ہیں. میں نے بتایا کہ لنگروال سے. اس کے بعد مجھے آپ کی واقفیت ہوگی. آپ ایک بالا خانے پر عبادت میں مصروف رہتے تھے، اور گھر سے جب روٹی آتی تو اس کی ایک کھڑکی سے بذریعہ چھینکا روٹی اوپر لے لیتے. اس کے بعد آپ سے مجھے انس ہو گیا اور گھر سے آپ کی روٹی میں لایا کرتا تھا. میں آپ کے پاس ہی رہتا تھا اور اسی کمرے میں سوتا تھا. آپ نے استخارہ کرنا بھی سکھایا. عشاء کی نماز کے بعد 2 رکعت پڑھنے کے بعد گفتگو نہیں کرنی ہوتی تھی. صبح کو جو خواب آتی میں وہ آپ کو بتلا دیتا. آپ کے پاس فارسی کا ایک تعبیر نامہ بھی تھا، آپ اسے دیکھتے تھے. آپ نے مجھے یہ بھی کہا کہ دونوں گھروں میں یعنی مرزا امام دین اور آپ کا مکان مراد تھا. استخارے کا طریق بتلا دو اور اس طریق سے وہ سویا کریں. یعنی روز استخارہ ہو رہا ہے. استخارہ یہ نہیں کہ کسی خاص کام کے لیے کیا جائے. استخارہ کیا ہے؟ اللہ تعالیٰ سے خیر مانگنی، رائٹ. روز استخارہ ہو رہا ہے، اور عشاء کی نماز پڑھ کے 2 نفل پڑھ کے استخارے کی دعا اس میں پڑھی گئی، اور اس کے بعد بغیر کسی سے کچھ کہے بولے گو ٹو بیڈ، اور اس طریقے سے وہ سویا کرے. اور یہ بھی آپ نے کہا تھا کہ صبح جا کر ان کی خوابیں سنا کرو. مجھے روٹی بھی بہت دفعہ آپ ساتھ ہی کھلاتے. حافظ معین الدین صاحب عرف مانا بھی آپ کے پاس آتے. مجھے آپ ان کی روٹی لانے کے لیے کہتے، چنانچہ میں لا دیتا. آپ کا گھرانہ بہت بڑا تھا، جو بھی آتا اسے روٹی مل جاتی. اس عام روٹی سے میں میاں مانا کی روٹی لاتا. حضرت مرزا صاحب اس وقت تک انتظار کرتے، اور جب میاں مانا کی روٹی آ جاتی تو اپنا سالن اس کے سالن میں ملا دیتے، پھر اسے روٹی دیتے اور کہتے کھائیں. اور خود آپ بہت آہستہ آہستہ روٹی شروع کرتے. جب میاں مانا اپنی روٹی کھا لیتے تو آپ دریافت کرتے اور بھی چاہیے. وہ کہتے اگر ہے تو دے دیں. تو بہت دفعہ حضور اپنا کھانا اور میرا بھی ان کو دے دیتے، اور وہ سب کھا جاتے میاں مانا. ایسے موقع پر تیسرے پہر پھر آپ مجھے پیسے دیتے کہ جا کر کابلی چنے بنوا لاؤ. आप एक दो दाने ही मुंह में डालते थे चनों के। आपकी आदत थी कि बातें बशाशत से करते और अक्सर रानों पर हाथ मारते, ऐसे हाथ मार के हुजूर बात करते। आप मस्जिद में फ़र्ज नमाज अदा करते, सुनते और नवाफिल मकान पर ही अदा करते थे। इशा की नमाज के बाद आप सो जाते थे और निसफ रात के बाद आप जाग पड़ते और नफल अदा करते। इसके बाद कुरान मजीद पढ़ना, मिट्टी का दिया आप जलाते थे, तिलावत फजर की अजान तक करते। जिस कमरे में आपकी रिहाइश थी वो छोटा सा था, उसमें एक चारपाई और एक तख्त पोश था। चारपाई तो आपने मुझे दी हुई थी और ख़ुद तख्त पोश पर सोते थे। फजर की अजान के वक्त आप पानी के हल्के हल्के छींटों से मुझे जगाते थे। एक दफ़ा मैंने दरियाफ़्त किया कि हुजूर मुझे वैसे ही क्यों नहीं जगा देते। आपने फरमाया, हुजूर रसूल करीम सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम का यही तरीक़ था। इस सुन्नत पर मैं काम करता हूँ ताकि जागने में तकलीफ़ महसूस ना हो। नमाज फ़जर के बाद आप वापस आकर कुछ अर्सा सो जाते थे, क्योंकि रात का अक्सर हिस्सा इबादत इलाही में गुजरता था। He says that in 1872 when he was a young boy, Mirza Muhammad Sahib, he visited Qadian, and he was a distant relative of relatives of Promised Messiah Islam. So in a way related to him. But Promised Messiah didn't really know him, and he didn't really know Promised Messiah Islam. So he would come and he would spend some time with the father of the Promised Messiah Islam, and then he would think that maybe Promised Messiah's father only has one son. And then he would go to the masjid, but then in the masjid he would see Hazrat Syedna Mirza Islam. And then he noticed that Syedna Mirza Islam is going to his father's home. And then he realized, okay, this is Mirza Ghulam Murtaza Sahib's son. So then one day he saw Hazur going into his room. So he went after Hazur, and Hazur opened the door and he said, "Who are you? What are you here for? What can I do for you?" And he said, "I just want to see you. I want to talk to you." And he introduced himself to Hazur, and then afterwards he started coming on regular basis to Hazur. And he says, I fell in love with him. He said, I would go and bring food for him from the residence. And he says that oftentimes Hazur would include me in his meal. And his meal would be very, very simple. And many a times another individual by the name of Manna would come up to Hazur, and Hazur would wait until food is brought for Manna Sahib as well. And then oftentimes Manna would end up eating Hazur's food as well. And Hazur wouldn't mind. Hazur would even offer it. And the man would just take it. And then Hazur would give a few paisas to Mirza Muhammad Sahib to go and bring some roti, or to go and bring some Kabuli chane. So he would bring these peas and Kabuli peas, and Hazur would take a few, and that would be it. Literally, that would be it. And he says that Hazur, whenever he would speak, he would have a smile on his face. He wouldn't have a frown on his face. When he would speak with a smile on his face. And oftentimes while speaking, he would hit his raan ko kya kahenge ji अंग्रेजी में? Thigh. He would hit his thigh with his hand while talking. These were the mannerisms of Hazrat Masih-e-Maud. He says Hazur would offer his fard salat in the masjid, but the sunnah prayers and nawafil prayers he would offer them at home. After Isha namaz, he would sleep and then wake up when it would be midnight. And then he would offer long tahajjud prayer. And then afterwards he would start reciting the Holy Quran and pondering over it until the azan of Fajr would be called. He says Promised Messiah also taught him how to do istikhara and asked him to teach it to others. And they would perform istikhara pretty much every night. In Hazur's room, there was a simple bed known as charpai. And there was a takht posh. Takht posh is, kya iska tarjuma kiya jayega ji takht posh ka? Sort of like Ottoman, if I could translate it as Ottoman. Hazur would give this man the proper bed, the charpai, and himself, he would just go and lay down on this so-called Ottoman type piece of furniture. Whatever comfort that could be there, he gave that up for others. And then at the time of Fajr, Hazur would wake Mirza Deen Muhammad Sahab by sprinkling some water on his face. And he would say, Hazur, why don't you just wake me up directly? And he would say, Holy Prophet ﷺ used to do this. It's much gentler way to wake somebody up than to wake them up by shaking them or calling them out. After Fajr, Hazur would retire to his bedroom and then would sleep a little because his nights were spent worshipping Allah Ta'ala and reciting the Holy Quran. Afterwards, Hazrat Masih-e-Maud appointed teachers who would teach his sons some literature. And oftentimes he himself would also teach his sons. Then in the year 1873, according to our historical records, is the first time that Hazrat Masih-e-Maud wrote poetry. And this initial poetry was written in Persian language. And Promised Messiah had a takhallus, the poetic name. And the poetic name that he had assumed was Farrukh Qadiani. And the poetry that he had written in that era, this is before he claimed to be Masih and Mahdi, it was eventually published much after his demise, 8-9 years after his demise. And it was published under the name, meaning the book was published under the title Durr-e Maknoon. It's available on Al-Islam and it's worth reading. Especially we, the Ahmadiyya Muslims, should read what Hazrat Masih-e-Maud has written in दावे से पहले की ज़िंदगी में आपने जो ये अशार कही हैं. There is an allegation which is made at this point, and I want to take some time in addressing that allegation. Many modern day scholars are of the opinion that a prophet of Allah Ta'ala cannot be a poet, in the sense that he cannot say ashar, cannot write poetry. And they have a verse that they quote. This verse is verse number 70 from Surah Yasin. Allah the Almighty says, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. وَمَا أَلَّمْنَاهُ الشِّعْرَ وَمَا يَنْبَغِي لَهُ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا ذِكْرٌ وَقُرْآنٌ مُبِينٌ. And we have not taught him the sha'r. Sha'r means couplet. وَمَا يَنْبَغِي لَهُ, nor is it worthy of him. إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا, it is merely dhikrun, zikr, remembrance, wa Quranun mubin, and Quran, which is mubin. Mubin means in clear and plain language. So they say, look, it says, wama yanbaghi lahu, wama allamnahu shi'r. We haven't taught Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam poetry. Wama yanbaghi lahu, and it is not worthy of him. So they say, if it is not worthy for him, how can it be worthy for others? But the fact of the matter is, they are taking this verse in a completely different meaning than it was intended to be. And I will prove that very point just now, inshallah ta'ala. First and foremost, wama yanbaghi lahu, the word lahu belongs to or refers to the Holy Quran. The preceding verses talk about how the preceding verses and elsewhere in the Holy Quran, and I'll quote a few verses, how the Quraysh and the opponents of Islam used to say that Holy Prophet ﷺ is a shair. They used to say he is the shair and the Holy Quran is nothing more but the work of a poet. It's poetry. They would listen to the rhythmic verses in surahs and they would say this is poetry. This is what they used to claim. And Allah Ta'ala said, we haven't taught Holy Prophet ﷺ poetry. But this is a specific type of poetry Allah is referring to, and I'll prove that in a minute. That we haven't taught Holy Prophet ﷺ poetry. And this isn't worthy of it, meaning this poetry is not worthy of Holy Quran. Holy Quran, the text that you refer to as being poetry or being poetic, it is against the teachings that are mentioned in this book. Here is the interesting part. Allah Ta'ala in Surah Al-Mu'minun verse 82 says, Bal qalu misla ma qala al-awwalun. the opponents of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam aren't saying anything new. They're saying exactly what the previous opponents of previous prophets used to say. Then in Surah Hamim Sajda verse 44, it is said, "Ma yuqalu laka illa ma qad qila lirrusuli min qablik." Nothing new is being said to you. Same things were alleged against previous prophets that came before you. Same thing is being mentioned here. So when these people were calling Quran as poetry and Holy Prophet ﷺ as poet, they were referring to something very, very specific. Very specific. According to the Arabic literature, Arabic dictionaries and whatnot, poetry is something that they consider to be based on mubalagha, exaggeration, fantasies, something which is not based on reality. Hence they say the greatest poetry would be the one which has greatest fantasies in it, greatest exaggerations in it. It is this thing that Allah the Almighty is negating. That if this is your definition of shair, because this was the definition of shair that Quraysh had in their mind when they were alleging that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a shair. Na'uzubillah. There was no other definition in their minds. Like for example, in chapter 21 verse number 6, they said, "Bal iftarahu bal huwa sha'ir." Regarding Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, these people said that this is a lie that this man has conjectured, referring to Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And they said, he is nothing but a shair, just a poet. They said, he has conjectured, he has come up with it on his own. Am yakuluna shairun natarabbasu bihi raibal manun. They would say, क्या वो कहते हैं कि ये एक शायर है जिसके मुतालिक हम गर्दिश ज़माने की राह देख रहे हैं? That he is just a poet. And just like every poet is destined to fail. Because whatever they are conceptualizing is based on, not on reality. Similarly, chapter 69 verse 42, وَمَا هُوَ بِقَوْلِ شَاعِرٍ. ये किसी शायर की बात नहीं. Allah Ta'ala is negating it. Allah Ta'ala is saying this is not the word of a poet. And then many other verses. But here's the interesting part. There is an entire surah called Ash-Shu'ara. Ash-Shu'ara in the Holy Quran. Chapter number 26. Chapter number 26, Surah Shu'ara, verses 225 onwards, read as follows. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. وَالشُّعَرَاءُ يَتَّبِعُهُمُ الْغَاوُونَ أَلَمْ تَرَ أَنَّهُمْ فِي كُلِّ وَادٍ يَهِيمُونَ وَأَنَّهُمْ يَقُولُونَ مَا لَا يَفْعَلُونَ. और रहे शुअरा तो महज भटकते हुए ही उनकी पैरवी करते हैं. ऐ मुखातिब, क्या तेरी समझ में अब तक नहीं आया कि वो शुअरा तो हर वादी में बेमकसूद के फिरते हैं और वो ऐसी बातें कहते हैं जो वो करते नहीं हैं. Allah the Almighty is saying that as far as these poets are concerned, only the misguided people will follow them. Do you not see that these poets, they are daydreamers? These people are daydreamers. They are dreaming about things which are not based on reality. وَأَنَّهُمْ يَقُولُونَ مَا لَا يَفْعَلُونَ. And these people are saying things that they don't really believe in. They don't follow it. They don't do it. This is the type of poetry that Allah the Almighty is negating. In the very next verse, and this is probably the last verse of this surah, the very next verse, Allah the Almighty says, here is an exception. Now I'm going to give you an exception. Poets are bad, poetry is bad, except إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَذَكَرُوا اللَّهَ كَثِيرًا وَانْتَصَرُوا مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا ظُلِمُوا وَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مُنْقَلَبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ. सवाए उनके जो उनमें से ईमान लाए. शुअरा बुरे हैं सवाए उनमें से जो ईमान ले आए हैं और नेक अमाल बजा लाए और कसरत से अल्लाह को याद किया और जुल्म का निशाना बनने के बाद उसका बदला लिया. और वो जिन्होंने जुल्म किया अनकरीब जान लेंगे कि वो किस लौटने के मकाम पर लौट जाएंगे. That poets are bad because of all these reasons that Allah the Almighty outlines. And then he says, except there is one category of such poets which is not bad, except the ones who have believed and are doing good deeds and they remember Allah much. And then Allah Ta'ala continues. So Allah Ta'ala is making an exception. It is this exception that Syedna Ahmad ﷺ falls under, which Allah Himself is opening the door to. It is this exception that other prophets who have written poetry would fall under. It is this verse of the Holy Quran that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself would fall under. Here is the reason why. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has on two distinct instances has narrated couple of ashar. In one battle, Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's finger got injured and it started to bleed. So addressing his finger, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Hal anti illa isba'un damiti, wa fi sabilillahi ma lakiti." Sounds like a share to me. It falls on the meter of poetry. They can say, "Oh no, this is not poetry. They can say whatever they want to say. At the end of the day, if it fits the meter, it is what it is." Then, at the time of Ghazwa Hunain, when a time came that the attack from the enemies was so strong that Holy Prophet ﷺ was left alone. And he was all by himself on his ride, and there was only one man who was with him at that time. In that moment, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam addressed the kuffar and he said, "Ana nabiyyu la kadhib, ana ibn Abdul Muttalib." I am the Prophet of Allah, and this is not a lie. Ana ibn Abdul Muttalib. I am the son of Abdul Muttalib. Sounds like a share to me. It fits the meter, the poetic meter. So again, these people can. I remember I had a discussion with a certain scholar who shall not be named, and this scholar said, "Oh no, this was not sher." He's like, "Sher padhne mein fark hai aur sher kehne mein fark hai." That it is a different thing to say it, and it is a different thing to compose it. Here's the thing. If poets are bad, it means poetry is bad. If poetry is bad, then it doesn't matter whether you're composing it or whether you're repeating it. It's still bad. It's like saying drugs are bad, and then saying producing drugs is bad. If producing drugs is bad, consuming drugs is bad. It's very logical. It makes logical sense. If something is bad, then to produce it is bad and to consume it is bad. Then why is it, if poetry in itself is bad, and there is no exception according to these so-called scholars, then why did Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam listen to poetry from his Sahaba? Why did he even say these ashar if poetry in and of itself is bad? Why did Holy Prophet ﷺ at certain occasions tell Hazrat Hassan bin Sabit radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, the official poet of the court of Rasulullah ﷺ, "Uhjul mushrikeen fa inna Jibreel ma'aka," that go and respond to the mushrikeen, go respond to the poetry of the mushrikeen, for surely Gabriel is with you, Jibreel is with you. If poetry is bad, what was Jibreel alayhi salam doing with Hazrat Hassan bin Sabit? The two couplets which I have presented, they are both from Sahih al-Bukhari, the most authentic book of hadith. जब अपना दिल करता है हदीस कोट कर लेंगे, जब अपना दिल नहीं करता तो उसी किताब को कोट करने से गुरेज करेंगे, कहते हैं तो क्या हदीस क्या है? Certain scholars, in order to prove that there is no more revelation, quote a certain hadith from Sahih al-Bukhari. On a different matter, when we present these ahadith from Sahih al-Bukhari, what is it? That's the nonsensical attitude that they adopt. And then remember, promised Messiah ﷺ is not the first or the last individual, to say poetry. There were prophets of Allah Ta'ala that came before who wrote poetry. Hazrat Dawood ﷺ, there are many of his poems which are mentioned in the Bible. Hazrat Sulaiman ﷺ, Songs of Solomon, which are recorded in the Bible. Psalms chapter 90 is attributed to Musa ﷺ. Even Musa ﷺ's poetry is mentioned. And Hazrat Masih-e-Maud ﷺ has also referred to this. Following biblical prophets were also known to have written poetry. Prophet Isaiah, Prophet Jeremiah, Prophet Ezekiel. Their writings, which are part of the Bible, also contain poetry. So there is an exception which Allah Himself has made, which is mentioned in the last verse of Surah Ash-Shu'ara. Not all poets are bad, and not all types of poetry is bad. Where Allah the Almighty is negating Holy Prophet ﷺ being taught poetry, or him being a poet, Allah the Almighty is referring to the first category. The category of daydreamers, exaggerators, those who fantasize things that aren't real. Those who create things out of thin air that don't exist. And wherever Allah Ta'ala is talking about the exception, that's where the good poetry is mentioned. Hamdiya and Natiya Kala. What is it? That was the poetry of the promised Messiah ﷺ. It was all hamd and naat. Hamd in praise of Allah, naat in praise of Holy Prophet ﷺ. And here is a historical fact. The first poem written in praise of the Holy Quran, the first poem written in praise of the Holy Quran was written by Hazrat Masih-e-Maud alayhi salatu wasalam. I remember reading this in one of the writings of Hazrat Muslim-Maud radhiyallahu ta'ala anhu. And I was amazed by it. I'm trying to find the reference if I can find it. Yes. Before the advent of the promised Messiah Islam, people had written hymns in the love of Allah and naats in the praise of Holy Prophet ﷺ, but no one had written any poem about the Holy Quran. Promised Messiah Islam is the first person in the history of Islam to have written about the excellences of the Holy Quran. This fact is mentioned by Hazrat Muslim-Maud radhiyallahu ta'ala anhu in his book Masih-e-Maud al-Islam ke Qadam hai. So this was the poetry that promised Messiah Islam wrote. And he himself says, कुछ शेर व शायरी से अपना नहीं है ताल्लुक, इस ढब से कोई समझे बस मुद्दा यही है. He says, I have nothing to do with poetry. I have nothing to do with poetry. I am using this as a tool so that maybe some people may understand. There are people, they don't understand speeches. They don't make any effect on them. They don't listen to waz. Waz means, advices. Their books don't work on them. Articles, essays don't work on them. But if they read the same thing or hear the same thing in a poetic sense, it clicks with them. Allah Ta'ala has created certain natures on that bend that they relate more to poetry. So that's what Prophet Messiah is saying. Holy Prophet I've shown that he has said ashar at least 2 times. And Bukhari quotes it. And then I've mentioned Dawud alayhi salam, Sulaiman alayhi salam, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Hazrat Musa alayhi salam, and Isaiah. All these prophets of Allah Ta'ala. Just because they want to disprove Hazrat Masih-e-Maud alayhi salam, they would have to disprove all these other prophets, unfortunately. There are verses in the Holy Quran that say on the day of judgment, Allah Ta'ala's angels will ask these people, why did you reject the messenger when he came to you? And they would say, we took him as a prophet. We took him as a poet. All these individuals who are rejecting promised Messiah alayhi salatu wasalam, because they consider him to be a poet. It seems like these verses would apply on them perfectly on the Day of Judgment, when the angels of Allah Ta'ala will hold them accountable and say, why did you reject the Mahdi and the Messiah that Allah had sent? At that time they will say, well, we took him as a poet. Same thing that happened at the time of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Same thing is happening at the time of Masih-e-Maud alayhi salatu wasalam. Moving forward, we enter the year 1874. In this year, something remarkable happens. Remember, in between, many signs were being shown by Allah Ta'ala. Revelations were happening, coming to promised Messiah Islam. Allah Ta'ala was showing or giving prophecies to promised Messiah, which were being fulfilled. 1874, he sees a dream. And in that dream, he sees an angel in the form of a boy who was sitting on a rooftop. He sees an angel of Allah Ta'ala sitting on a rooftop, and holding in his hand is a piece of bread, naan, Asian bread. And that piece of naan or naan itself it's shining bright. And he extended to the promised Messiah and he says, ye tere liye aur tere saath ke darvishon ke liye, that this bread is for you and for darvishes with you. This was a prophecy that a time is fast approaching when there will be a group of heavenly people with him. And the other prophecy was, because roti or bread in Bible, it is interpreted that bread refers to Asmani Badshahat. Bread refers to spiritual kingdom. It referred to the fact that promised Messiah is about to be crowned a spiritual king in near future. He is about to receive spiritual kingship. And it also meant that Allah Ta'ala will grant him sustenance. Will grant him sustenance. There is a reason why this is mentioned. I want to read this narration to you at this point. Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Sani Razillah Ta'ala in Tazkar-e Mahdi has mentioned this. He says, जब दादा साहब फौत हो गए तो बावजूद इसके कि हज़रत मसीह-ए-मौद अलैहिस्सलाम की तवज्जो दीन की तरफ इस कदर थी कि बड़े भाई से जायदाद वगैरह के मुतल्लिक कोई सवाल न किया, आप दिन रात मस्जिद में पड़े रहते। मैंने हज़रत मसीह-ए-मौद अलैहिस्सलाम से सुना, आप फरमाया करते थे, उन दिनों मैं भुने हुए चने अपने पास रख लिया करता था और आखिरी उम्र तक बावजूद के बुढ़ापा आ गया था, आपको चनों का शौक़ रहा और शायद ये विरसे का शौक़ है जो मुझे भी है, और मुझे दुनिया की बहुत सी नेमतों के मुकाबले में चने अच्छे लगते हैं। हज़रत मसीह-ए-मौद अलैहिस्सलाम फरमाया करते थे कि मैं भुने हुए चने अपने पास रख लेता, और जब कई दफ़ा घर से खाना ना आता, और मैं पोशीदा तौर पे रोजे रखता तो चनों पर गुजारा कर लिया करता था। आपने अल्लाह ताला के हुक्म से 6 माह तक मुतवातिर रोजे रखे। इस अरसे में बसा औकात 2 पैसे के चने भुनवा कर आप रख लेते। The man belonging to the richest family in Qadian. A time came upon him when his own family wouldn't feed him. खाना नहीं थे भेजते। बड़ी भाभी, एक ही भाभी थी, खाना नहीं थी भेजती। कई दिन खाना नहीं था आता। मसीह-ए-मौद अलैहिस्सलाम खुद जिक्र करते हैं, लफाजातुल मवाइदी काना उकली वसिरतुल यौमा में तामल हाली। ये हमारे जिम में बड़ा वो बैनर भी लगा हुआ है किचन के बाहर, कि एक वो ज़माना था कि बचे कुछ टुकड़े मेरे खाना हुआ करते थे और आज हज़ारों ख़ानदान मेरे दस्तरखान से खा रहे। दिस वॉज द प्रोफेसी दैट मसीह-ए-मौद अलैहिस्सलाम रिसीव्ड। ये नाम तेरे और तेरे साथ के दरवेशों के लिए। Look how Allah Ta'ala changed everything. Is this how Allah treats someone who is a liar? So this incident of promised Messiah ﷺ fasting for 6 months, and in some narration it is mentioned 8 to 9 months. This happened in the year 1875. Same year, the Masjid-e-Aqsa, the mosque Masjid-e-Aqsa in Qadian, the land for it was purchased by the father of the promised Messiah ﷺ. And the way it was purchased is there was this land that promised Messiah's father wanted to purchase. And then there were other relatives. They did not want Hazur's father to purchase that land. So they wanted to outbid him. The land wasn't worth much at that point. And because they were outbidding him, he had to purchase that land for 700 rupees, his annual pension. He gave all of that to purchase this single piece of land. And he even stated that if I have to sell everything I own, I want to buy this land so that I can build a masjid. The father of the promised Messiah Islam, who had spent his entire life running after the dunya, now his life had turned and he wanted to invest in his afterlife. So he purchased this land and he builds Masjid-e-Aqsa on it. So the groundbreaking and the brick laying took place in the year 1875. I think the masjid was completed in the year next, the following year in 1876. And there were a very small Muslim population, and there were quite a few mosques, small mosques in Qadian. So people used to say that there are enough mosques in Qadian for Muslims. What's the need for this such a huge masjid? Masjid Aqsa is the largest masjid in Qadian. So what's the need for such a big mosque? And they used to comment that it is such a big mosque, nobody is going to come here. This masjid is going to be populated by bats. यहाँ पे चिमगादड़ रहा करेंगे. No human would come and pray here because people would just go to mosques closer to them. What they didn't know, what even probably the father of Promised Messiah did not know, is that this masjid was going to serve a very great purpose. It was going to become the masjid of a Nabi of this day and age, Hazrat Masih-e-Maud ﷺ. Inshallah ta'ala, this is where the year 1875 ends, and inshallah in tomorrow's lecture I'll continue where I have left off. Muhammadur Rasulullah.